I'll write I think, let's see. I want to be able to optimize for video clip, but it's not letting me. Hopefully this works. Sometimes if you don't hit that little button, you just end up all seeing one screen for the entire time I'm talking. So if I'll let you know, like first time I switch slides, if it doesn't change, then tell me and we'll try to figure that out. Never seen that one before.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay. My Windows set up. Okay, cool. I can see you. Open the chat so I don't miss anything. All right. Cool. So we're gonna talk about accessibility. Before we even start, like I'm curious, because Mari and Satoshi, how familiar are you with accessibility? Is this something like I don't actually remember if you all did boot camps or like how you've gone about your learning, but is this something you've encountered? Like, have you done any kind of focused study on it or anything?
Yeah, I mainly learn through online resources, and they mention about accessibility, but I didn't pay much attention to accessibility. But throughout this program, the Collab Lab, they care a lot, so I'm getting more aware how to implement the better accessibility on the website.
Okay.
Yeah, and in my experience with my coding bootcamp, they really very lightly touched on accessibility. I think the only topic that we ever talked about was like the Chrome extension Lighthouse for testing a website to see, if it does meet accessibility criteria, like on I think like a 100 rating scale. But they didn't really go into depth as far as like what to look out for and, how to make a web app accessible. So this is my first exposure to really kind of getting more experience with that and just being a lot more aware of people who maybe have to use screen readers to kind of navigate around a website and, as a web developer, what aspects you need to add to your app in order for it to be more accessible.
Okay. Yeah, that's super common, like those two stories. It's like I think it's like from my perspective, because I work in accessibility every day. So I've helped run a company that builds accessibility tooling. So I'm always hearing about it, and it's hard for me to know whether that means that everyone is hearing more about it or if it's just I'm in some kind of bubble. And it sounds like things haven't changed all that much out in real world, like boot camps they know they need to mention it, but maybe they don't have the time to go super in depth, or sometimes even the expertise to really know what to teach some in that sphere. So this is also going to be a little bit of, it's like we only have a certain amount of time, so it's going to be a fairly high level overview, but hopefully it gives you a few things, a few tips, and then a few things you can dig into to, kind of learn more if you want to. So the first thing, now you've probably seen this before, right? And it's what's called a numeronym. Is that what that word is? It's basically, it's taking, these are not L's, these are ones, right? So it's 11, and that's because there are 11 letters between the A and the Y in accessibility. So it's A11Y. It's not ally. But that's where that comes from. So just kind of get that out of the way. You see a hashtag a lot and that kind of thing. So but accessibility is really this practice of ensuring there are no barriers to prevent people from accessing or interacting with websites. No one calls it the World Wide Web anymore. But anyway, thanks Wikipedia. But there's people with physical disabilities, situational disabilities. We'll talk about temporary disabilities, socioeconomic restrictions on bandwidth and speed. Like all these things can contribute to making it harder to access a website. So there are things that I feel like as developers we have a responsibility to do what we can to reduce these barriers. So when this is done well, when it's and it really starts in design and even user experience research. When it's considered all the way through, we can make websites and web apps that are super usable and kind of grant us equal access to information to everybody. So when that isn't there, it's really like we've sort of designed an inaccessible experience. It's not that the person with the disability is wrong or bad or has like some fault or something. It's like we've created an environment where they're not able to access, and that's on us. It's not on them, if that makes sense, right? It's like, you know, the curb cut example where, you know, you get to the corner of a sidewalk and, you know, if you're in a wheelchair or you're a mom pushing or dad pushing a stroller or something like that, like if you can't get down that curb, it's because, you know, the city didn't they didn't design the environment to serve you, right? So the W3C, so the World Wide Web Consortium, they have a working group dedicated to web accessibility. They have standards. In the US, Section 508 has been around, I mean, for probably 25 years or something, kind of making government agencies, but making sure that the things that they publish are accessible. There are a lot of other regulations and things too, but a lot of guidelines out there, and it can actually be pretty confusing to know what to pay attention to. But there's generally, we'll probably talk about WCAG in here, but there's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is sort of the standard that most people work towards, and most of the regulations refer to those standards as well. All right, so what does this mean? So there are some people with disabilities, not all people with disabilities. People have all kinds of disabilities. Access websites using assistive technologies. So what people usually think of with that is screen readers. So that's software that will read the page to the user and allow them to interact with the page in some different ways. So you may know that you can sort of tab through the fields on a web page. A screen reader has another mode called virtual cursor, which they can actually use the arrow keys and can navigate around the page, sort of independent of the tab focus. And then screen readers have other tools too. You can look at a page as a series of headers. You can look at all the links on the page. You can, like, there's all these, you know, you can jump landmark to landmark. There's all these kind of modes that screen readers have. Screen magnifiers are super common. I mean, honestly, I use a version of that. I mean, I bump up, you know, I'm on a big monitor. My eyes aren't so great these days. And so I'll be bumping up the fonts and all that kind of stuff, right? So then there are other types of screen magnifiers. Speech to text. So, you know, if you don't have the motor control to use a keyboard, you know, you can still talk to your computer. And, you know, there are programmers who use, you know, this kind of speech to text technology. And that to me always is really impressive, because in programming, you have to be so precise about every character, you know, but they managed to get that done. Dictation software. So yeah, all these kind of things. I don't know if you've ever, if you know about braille displays. So, you know, screen readers are one way that blind people consume the web, but also they can have the web or, you know, an ebook or any of those kinds of things read to them just by placing their hands on this little device that changes the braille underneath their fingertips. And it's super cool. But if you think about that, and like, you know, like all the effort you're putting into colors and like making this cool design, that person's not going to see any of that. They just need to know this, you know, the structure of the page. It needs to make sense when it's kind of read out to them linearly, right? So anyway, lots of tools that people use. Yeah, just a lot of people kind of default to thinking assistive technology means screen reader, and it's actually not the worst thing in the world, because if you design your stuff to work well with a screen reader, it's probably going to work pretty well with other assistive technologies. But just be aware that there are other modalities that people use to kind of access the web. On Windows, NVDA and JAWS are the popular screen readers. Windows has a built-in one called Narrator as well, that people report as pretty buggy. JAWS is expensive, so NVDA is open source and free, and so it's actually the most popular one that Windows users use. Mac and iOS users have VoiceOver built in. I think there might be one or two other options on Mac and iOS, but they don't have nearly the usage of VoiceOver. And then on Android, there's systems called TalkBack. So those are some of the screen readers. All right, so why do we do this, right? So I mean, the main thing is it's the right thing to do. Like when I got my start in web development, there's a lot of talk about sort of the ideals of the web. Like, everyone was very aware that the web was going to change everything when it was invented. And, it's like the new printing press and all this kind of stuff. And so there were a lot of people at the beginning who really wanted to kind of in this idealistic way, make sure that everyone had access to the web. So they didn't want the infrastructure to be owned by like a single company. They didn't want, all these kinds of principles. Accessibility to me is like one of those things. It's like, it goes back to sort of the founding principles of the web. It's, this is this tool has sort of transformed the way we do everything. And to have some people shut out of that, it's just an injustice, right? So we don't want that to happen. In addition, if you're at a company or a government agency or a school or whatever, you might be legally obligated to make your website accessible. So I mentioned Section 508, but there's, like in Ontario, Canada, if you have a company over 50 employees or something like that, they have really stringent requirements around accessibility for websites there. So yeah, it kind of depends where you are, some of those legal things you need to navigate. And then there are a lot of people who use assistive technologies. And so this is an estimate, but more people in the US use assistive technologies to access the web than all the people that live in Canada. So if you're at a company and you're trying to make a business case for this, I mean, that's like, would you exclude Canada from your product? Like, no, you wouldn't do that, right? So why would you do that with people using assistive technologies just in the US? Not to mention, kind of worldwide. So, and something about that too is that not everyone who's using assistive technologies even kind of considers themselves disabled. Like some people, there are, because I do this stuff, like I'm kind of paying attention to this stuff. I hear stories of people like, like, oh, while I'm cooking, I just have a screen reader like read articles to me or something. It's like, well, okay, so there are people who are also kind of using this technology just to make their regular, kind of their lives easier. So, and then the last benefit too is just that when you pay attention to accessibility, if you kind of do a lot of these practices, it actually makes the web more usable for everybody. An example of that is just, one of the first things you do is make sure that all the elements on the page can get, you can reach them via tab, like via the keyboard somehow. And that actually just like, if somebody's like gets really used to your site and they're kind of a power user of your site, they're going to appreciate being able to fly through it with a keyboard as well. So, and then just, kind of semantic structures and all these things, just everything's just going to be easier for everybody. So bit on the why. And then I mentioned this kind of temporary disabilities and things. So Microsoft has done some really amazing work around inclusive design. And they've actually updated this since we made these slides, but they have this kind of permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities, this persona spectrum that they've come up with. So, and then, kind of across some different common disabilities. But the idea is that there are people who have a disability of a certain type. They will always have it. You lose an arm, you're not going to get your arm back. Or you might have a prosthetic or something, right? But that's going to be with you all your life. But you might break your arm, right? So, and that's maybe a 6 to 8 week thing where you are also in that same situation. Or you might be a parent with a kid in one arm and you're just trying to do things with one hand, So, like with phones, the fact that like there was a point where a lot of the phone UIs moved controls down to the bottom because people were trying to reach them with their thumb, right? Because you didn't have, you couldn't hold the phone and then use your other hand. So, yeah, these kinds of things. I mean, it's the point of all this is really that like all of us and like pretty much everybody at some point is going to benefit from us paying attention to accessibility. Like there are going to be times when we, you might have an eye infection or something, right? Like you have to bump up the fonts because you're like it's harder to see, or there's all kinds of reasons why all of us could kind of end up needing these same technologies. All right, so y'all are developers, you're all doers. Let's talk about how. So the first thing, most important thing to do is to use valid semantic HTML. And just to kind of set all this up. So there's like 8 tips in here. these are some of the simple, easy, like the things you can do, you could kind of implement today. This is not comprehensive. It's not, like there are a lot of situations that are honestly really tricky and things. So these are just some things to get you started, kind of examples of the types of things to pay attention to. But yeah, valid semantic HTML is the basis for all of it. Well, it actually relates to this to area or aria. There's so you've probably heard in your studies and things not to just use divs for everything, right? Like use an H1 for a header and use a details element instead of building your own, right? We found that out after the hard way. So there are all these elements that kind of provide meaning and structure to the page, but they also a lot of times add a lot of accessibility features. So an example, so there's this quote up here, the best aria is no aria at all when we can use semantic HTML, do that, right? So an example, like you can have a div and you can put an aria role of button on it, and it will kind of act like a button, but it doesn't actually, just adding that role doesn't add all the accessibility features that an actual just default button tag will add to the page. So you can go through a whole lot. You could build a select list that's just as accessible as the select tag, but it's really hard actually. And there are a lot of edge cases, and you're probably going to miss things. And why do that? The element exists, So so whenever you can, use semantic HTML and avoid aria if you can, but then definitely use it if it's necessary. If there's some gap in what you're trying to do, something that really isn't covered by the existing HTML, that's why aria is there, to kind of add more hints and more kind of kind of hooks for the assistive technology to use. This one, I think most people know this, always have an alt attribute on your image tags. What goes in the alt attribute is a much more nuanced conversation, right? Like there are cases where it should be empty, and there are cases where it should have text, and what is that text? So there's sort of layers to that too, but at a minimum, always have that attribute present, because if you don't, it gets announced to the screen as like capital image, all caps image. So we'll avoid that at the very least. I mentioned being able to get to all the content via the keyboard, and then making sure that your elements have reasonable target sizes. So the technology I didn't actually specifically call out is there are people who they literally navigate the web by using their chin to move a joystick, to move like a cursor around and stuff. And so they don't have super fine, like if you have a big button, it's much easier for them to hit the button than it is for them to like get to some little tiny element that they need to click or something, right? So and that's just one example. I mean, it helps cut down error rates. I always appreciate this, like a massive button I can match, so I don't have to like kind of dial it in and like kind of watch it as it gets closer and stuff. And there are, in the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there are specifications for how big these buttons should be, how far apart they should be, all those kinds of things to make sure that they're at, meeting a minimum bar of accessibility. We'll actually talk about tab ordering in a minute, but so there's an attribute called the tab index that you can put on elements, but you almost never should. You should, the better way to make sure that people can tab through your page in a way that makes sense is just by ordering the HTML in an order that makes sense. You can use CSS to move things around visually, but the sort of, if you were to read through the HTML linearly, that order should make sense, and that should match up for the most part with your tab order. So things like forms is where that gets tricky, because if you're like, at least like in the US, like I would expect to be able to put in the street and then the city, the state, and then the zip code, right? So I'd want to, if I hit tab, I want it to go through in that order. But it's really easy. Like sometimes it'll jump to one or the other just because the order in the HTML is not the same. was pleased to hear y'all paying attention to color contrast. That's really like kind of a table stakes one, like where you want to make sure that you have a certain amount of contrast. People with low vision can still access the page. And then I thought I saw in some of the screenshots that you all were using more than just color to signify the state of items in the list as well. That's one where certain types of color blindness what might prevent, red and green are actually really common. Red-green color blindness is a common form of it. So people have like those both basically come out as some shade of gray, and so and red and green, like in American culture anyway, is like stop and go, right? So it's used a lot in interfaces, and so you also need some kind of label or some other icon or something else that also signifies the state. All right. So ARIA, let's talk a little bit more about ARIA. So ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. So it's also a technical specification. And it's really easy to misuse. So like I was saying, like try to start with semantic HTML and then only add ARIA if you need to. So here's an example. So the idea here is that we have a UI element, toggle switch that you can use to turn a setting on and off. So there's no concept for that in HTML. So there is no semantic tag you can use, but you could use ARIA to kind of make this switch roll, and then have ARIA also track whether it's in an on state or not, right? So that's enough to kind of give assistive technology something to work with. But then you're still going to need to, like, that's not going to do anything, but it's just going to be a button in HTML unless you add CSS and JavaScript to make it kind of look and work like a button. But it is possible to use ARIA in creative ways to kind of fill in gaps in HTML. And here's what I was saying about div role equals button. Like it's not the same thing. In some ways they're equivalent. Like the assistive technology knows that this is supposed to be a button, but there's things like having it work with space or arrow keys and things. Those things don't just work out of the box. Like you would have to fill in all that functionality to make these truly equivalent. So better off you have a button element. It's possible to style it, so there's no real reason to do this ever. All right, and then when you get out into your jobs, you're likely to be working on an existing product or application that probably, almost certainly has some accessibility problems. And so what are ways that you can kind of go about identifying accessibility issues? So there are automated tools, and there are a bunch of others actually besides just Axe. When I made these slides 3 years ago, or 3.5, 4 years ago, or whatever it was, I was mostly aware of Axe, but there's Wave and Evinced and other tools out there as well. Axe is what's called a static code analyzer. Like it does static code analysis, and so it's pretty limited in the types of things that it can find. It can only find what is there kind of in the HTML basically. So it's really good at finding a missing alt attribute. There are other things that are more sophisticated that it can find as well, but even if it tells you that you're missing an alt attribute, it can't tell you what should go in the alt attribute, if that makes sense. So it doesn't know whether it should be blank or what. It doesn't know what it can't read the content of the image itself and like understand that. There are people that are working on automating this alt text, but there's a lot of debate in the accessibility community. Mostly, actually, there's not a lot of debate. People are really against it. It's controversial that people are even trying to do that because it really, like, humans probably for now should be writing those. But 5 years from now, the AI is probably going to be good enough to help out a lot there. There are guided audits, and I'm going to actually kind of show you accessibility insights here in a second. That's Lighthouse is a great tool. It actually has Axe under the hood. Accessibility insights it's by Microsoft. It's a really, really nice tool as well. And then testing your work directly using assistive technologies. That is helpful. It's also not sufficient because at least I don't think anyone here is a daily screen reader user, right? So there are going to be ways that somebody who uses this stuff all the time, they're going to have strategies and patterns and different things that they employ that we're not aware of, and that we would miss things, right? A lot of a common mistake that developers make are like, oh, I got kind of familiar with the screen reader, so I started testing my own stuff, and that's honestly, it's great. It's better than nothing. But a mistake that a lot of people make is they just kind of go through the page linearly. Whereas somebody who uses screen readers all the time, they're going to be task focused, and so they're going to probably come in, try to get an idea of the structure of the page. So they're going to listen to all the headings. They're probably only going to listen to the first couple of syllables of each of the headings. This is where it gets really interesting. Is so if you can kind of Google around for videos of people. Actually, I think I have one linked here. Yeah. So Sam Prue, he works for Fable Tech Labs, and him demoing his screen reader, and he has the speech rate is turned up to, it's so fast, I can't even recognize that it's speech. It's so fast, and he can literally have it talk for, just a fraction of a sentence, and he'll kind of know okay, I got it. So there are things around actually the accessibility of the text that you write on your page, and kind of using a journalistic style, like front loading the meaning. Instead of saying, click here to blah, 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 you would say blah, blah, blah by clicking here, right? So you'd want that kind of front load that, right? Because it's so much more efficient for someone on a screen reader if they're not having to wade through like a bunch of boilerplate text to get to the meaning of the link or whatever it is. Anyway, so I would encourage you to test stuff yourself, just to, if nothing else, to build some empathy for your users. But it's probably, it's having those skills will let you, the main thing it'll let you do is if you get a bug report saying here's this situation where a person on a screen reader ran into a certain problem, you'll be able to reproduce it because you're like, I'm not afraid of NVDA. I can get in there and kind of like navigate and try to do it the way that they're describing that they did it, and reproduce the bug, tell whether it's fixed. That's really useful. But it's not the same as having, like Fable Tech Labs employs a community of people who are daily assistive technology users. And Alejandro and I actually, we brought them in when we were at Zapier and had them review some work that we had done. And it was just like, whoa, it was actually Sam Prue too, who did our test. And he blew our minds. It was really good. So what I guess the idea there is, it doesn't have to be Fable Tech Labs. Some companies employ people, their own testers who are blind or low vision or deaf and like different disabilities. There are also just QA companies that can do some accessibility testing, but the idea is to have people who actually use this technology all the time audit your work and tell you whether it's a good experience, because as much as we might follow best practices and all those kinds of things, it's not the same as someone who uses this stuff all the time using it. I guess that's also the last one. Okay, so demo time. All right, so I'm going to demo accessibility insights, and I'm going to actually use this Zapier page. Alejandro, what do you think of that?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So accessibility insights, again, it's a Chrome extension by Microsoft. They actually, on Windows, they have a full blown application as well that can help you test other things besides websites. But the Chrome extension is really useful. So it has this fast pass option, which is what I use mostly. And then it has a few other options. So you can actually go through a very in-depth, like guided audit of your stuff using accessibility insights. And at every step, every time it finds something, or it'll tell you what it's checking, and it'll have links off to all the guidelines and all these kinds of things that it's checking against. So this is actually an amazing way to learn about accessibility, is to just try using this tool and going through an assessment. Usually I'm crunched for time or whatever, so I'll hit fast pass and see what's up. So there are this is the Zapier homepage, and there are 19 instances of problems. So now, first of all, so there's ARIA hidden focus. These elements, ensures that these elements are not focusable. Button name needs to have a discernible text, color contrast. The first thing that kind of jumped out to me when I saw this is that there are 15 instances of this. And so it's probably, and this is not a super common error or problem. So that made me think that that's probably one component that's just failing over and over again. Like it's on the page multiple times, and so it has multiple instances. So let's open it up. So there's, first of all, there's more, Accessibility Insights has more info about it. They link off to the WCAG standard that it is failing. And then, so it shows you the code, and you can actually click on this and it'll take you to the element, which just scrolled off the page, I think. Okay, here we go. So you can see this, it's outlined here. These two are outlined. And indeed, this is, it's some kind of little card that was made that, is, the little card is not accessible, and then they put it on the page 15 times. So that thing is going to cause some problems, and it's probably has that hidden attribute. The hidden attribute might be changing to false when it is visible or something, but it's not being picked up by the tool. So maybe they all start off as false or as true, hidden true, and then they're changing as they come through, maybe. So this would be one, again, it's like this is an automated checker. It's helpful for identifying what might be a problem, but somebody would need to go in and test and like, oh yeah, actually, yeah, when they get, once they're visible, they turn, it turns to false. And then they could kind of mark that as resolved, right? Let's see where that button was. Aha, so we have this big image that's a button. And looks like it's to launch a video, but it doesn't have a name, right? So you could actually give this, and if you can see the code here too, right? So we can see there's no ARIA label attribute. The tool is telling us there's no ARIA label to buy. Some other thing is not giving it a name. So the title attribute, whatever. So we would need to go in here and add the ARIA label to that element to make that one pass. And that would, it's a video, so who knows if the video is accessible? That's a whole other issue. But at least then a screen reader user would know that if they were to interact with this button, it would cause a video to start playing. But at this moment, they're like, it's a button. I have no idea what it does. And then there are some color contrast issues as well. And those, I think those were up in the mail. All right. Not sure where that one was. Oh, okay. Yeah. So there's these buttons. That's Zapier's brand color, so they probably wouldn't be up for doing anything about that, but they so yeah, trying to think of what they could do to solve that. So one thing they could do is, if somebody has like increased contrast, you can detect contrast from the like as a system setting. They could put maybe a black outline around the text or something. Or if somebody was I don't know, it's probably maybe the best idea. Anyway, so that kind of gives you an idea of like what kinds of things Accessibility Insights can show you. There's also this is always a fun demo because it's so visual, but you have this thing for tab stops. So let's turn that on and start tabbing around the page, and it'll show you the order that that tabbing happens on the page. So that's a nice way to kind of quickly just validate that order kind of makes sense. Ooh. Possible failure is auto-detected. Okay, I don't know why it's telling you that now. Anyway, so that's a little sort of an intro. I also wanted to show you on the Collab Lab page, just kind of first of all, because our friend EJ built a site, no problems, at least nothing that automated checks can detect, but let's just do the tab stop thing because it's pretty interesting. So the first thing that EJ did when they built the site was to build a skip to content link into the site. So the first tab actually goes to that. It's hidden to sighted users, but you can use that to skip ahead. I'm not sure why it stays on it for another tab, but then we start, kind of tabbing through things, and it's kind of, it kind of goes in the order you would expect. But then we get down here, and you start it's like, whoa, man! If I want to get to the end of the page, if I wanted to get to the footer, I'm going to be sitting here clicking for a long time, right? I'm going to be tabbing. So that was something I wanted to show, mostly because it's correct, but it's not a good experience for someone trying to do keyboard only, right? So that's just like another layer or kind of level of things to consider. It can be accessible. It could actually kind of meet all the guidelines and things, but there might be other considerations that you want to take into account. And here, what I would probably do is have some kind of maybe even a hidden link up here somewhere. It's like, hey, you're about to get into the land of a million tab stops. If you want to jump to the, they're probably just like skip to the footer or something, So yeah, I guess that's probably enough for the demo. Oh, well, I didn't really show the more in-depth. You can kind of do the kind of guided assessment as well. So, and you can see all the things that it'll talk you through. Tons of information in here. So, so each one of these, has a sort of sub items as well. So, it's going really slowly. I've been clicking, and I'm not sure why it's not working. Anyway, so if you really want to go in depth and kind of understand everything that's being checked and kind of learn more about accessibility, I would suggest doing that. And then I'll share the slides after we're done, and there's a bunch of links in here. System Labs is my company, and I'm happy to give anybody here like a free freelancer account if you wanted to kind of get in and just try out screen readers on Windows. But I think that's it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Questions? Yeah, for sure. Any questions or anything? Seeing any of that, was it how much of that was familiar? How much of that was new information?
Raise your hand. Go ahead.
Okay. Andrew, I have a question about how can you, I guess, the more accessible you design something, right? The harder, there are design constraints when you let's say that the design team wants to build something that is not accessible, but then you advocate for it. If you try to make something accessible for everyone, maybe design is not going to buy it. How can you, from your experience, what do you think is a good move there?
Yes, and I realize you're asking kind of about a tactical thing. What can the developer do in that moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are other things that like pushing on the organization's accessibility maturity is the thing that then would lead to the designers actually taking accessibility into account, which would mean you would never be in that situation, right? That's this concept called shifting left. So this is a very kind of maybe Western way to look at it. It's text goes left to right, and so you want to shift things earlier. You shift them left. So yeah, hopefully you wouldn't be in that position, or designs involving development early enough that you'd be like, hey, I think there might be some accessibility concerns with this. Could you take that into account? Like how would a keyboard only user use this or something at a bare minimum, or what? I mean, even better would be, what would be a great experience for someone who is having this read to them? Kind of ask those questions early enough in the process that they're not then kind of like, hey, here's this fully baked thing that you need to now build, but then then there's a lot of like kind of people have this kind of sunk cost fallacy thing going on in their head where they think like, oh, we spent all this time on this, we can't go back and revise it, but we have to launch it tomorrow, you know. So better not to get in that situation. Once you're in that situation, it's tough. I mean, this is something that everybody struggles with, and you can, you know, and it really depends on like your own comfort with your team, how much sort of credibility and clout you have with, you know, like your designers and managers and people. If you're, you know, you don't have that stuff and they're just like, you have to build it, like I guess you do your best and you try to, there are lots of resources. There's a web accessibility Slack. It's web-a11y.slack.com. And people come on there all the time with like, I've been asked to build this thing. I know it's terrible. How can I make it a little bit better? If you want to get into that Slack, like I can invite you. It's an invite only kind of thing because they had problems with spammers. So yeah, I guess there's no super easy answer. Like you know, do the best you can and try to test it yourself, and maybe there's something tricky you can come up with that actually makes it work a little bit better. That happens a lot.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Ismar.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I had to like go out of the call for a second because I think I just have like a family emergency going on right now.
Oh.
So I have to leave the call a little early. But I just wanted to, before I left, just say thank you for sharing the accessibility slides, and I will definitely take a look at the links in the deck later.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. Hope you're well.
Right.
Please go, Ismari. Yeah.
All right.
Take
Thank
care.
you, everyone.
Satoshi, what did you think? Anything like new information there for you?
Yeah, it's new information, like using some software to checking the usability.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question. I think there are a lot of developers who has different awareness of the usability. And then what made you more aware of the usability on web? Like
Yeah,
throughout the job?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never actually been an accessibility tester. I've never had accessibility in my title or anything like that. Until I guess I still don't actually technically, but even though I work for an accessibility tools company. But just going way back, you know, when I was very kind of into the ideals of the web, like I was saying, and so when I heard about accessibility, it really like oh yeah, I totally see the need for that. It's totally the right thing to do. And so I was mostly a front end developer throughout my career. I just tried to pay attention to it and tried to integrate it into my own work. Kind of like, you know, Ollie, what you were talking about, like, you know, other people weren't necessarily even thinking about it, but I was like, oh, you know, making sure I always had the alt attribute, and like was trying to like, you know, just use semantic HTML and kind of like do things that I had control of to make my work more accessible. You know, in the last few years, actually at Zapier, we had a pretty strong accessibility guild. So it was probably this kind of grassroots movement among employees of, hey, let's make the thing more accessible. Started off just developers, got a designer or two to join the group, and then finally I think a PM might have joined around the time that I was leaving. And that was like this kind of thing where we were all trying to push the leadership to pay more attention to it. And finally we got a VP of design who had led accessibility efforts at her previous company. So she was kind of an executive sponsor for a while, and we went through what's called an accessibility maturity model audit. So we did a self-assessment of Zapier's accessibility maturity, and not surprisingly, we were pretty early on across most of the dimensions. But it was like really nice to kind of set a baseline and kind of know what things you would need to do to kind of get to the next step of maturity. Yeah, then that all came out of just like the efforts of a few people kind of advocating for it and trying to educate, you know, everyone else in the company about it. So it is possible to kind of do that, you know, but it's much better when it's like there's people on the ground who want to do it and the leadership is behind it, and then you can just sort of make a lot of progress really fast.
Yeah, that's true. If the leader is well aware of that, naturally the team will take care of it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Cool. Well, let me know who wants an account on Assistive Labs. Happy to. It's just a freelancer account. It's like gives you like 2 hours a month or something. But you can at least, you know, if you're working on a Mac, you can at least just get into NVDA and kind of test stuff. So through a web
I'm raising
browser.
my hand.
Cool. Yeah, just I will
Yeah.
forget. So
I will reach out to you.
write me somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I will. I will.
Cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for having me, and hopefully the people who weren't here get to kind of watch the recording and stuff. But
Yeah,
I'm
I feel
Mhm.
like you add a lot more information than from the last cohort too, I remember. Yeah, so
I'm learning about it all
it's
the
always
time too.
evolving. Yeah.
Because as we talk to our customers, you know, they're describing the struggles that they're having sort of organizationally, or like specific bugs that they're running into and stuff. So my knowledge has been, I mean, this increased probably 5 times since a year and a half ago when I started this job. So
That's awesome. Thank you,
yeah,
Andrew.
it's fun.
I have one more question, really
Mhm.
quick. Andrew, what do you think is the, like, maybe what is your go-to place to learn more about accessibility? Because, like, for instance, from my experience is that we have this spec, you know, and the spec is like really technical, but one thing is reading that, and the other one, at least for me, is like seeing how people implement the spec, you know, in a real world scenario. Like, what do you think are good resources for improving, like, learning?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the web accessibility Slack is an amazing place to learn. But it's not structured in a way. It's not like taking a course and learning a specific thing. It's just like whatever questions people come in with, you know, you can kind of pick up knowledge that way. There's I should actually add this to the slides, but there's this accessibility support. It's kind of like the caniuse.com of accessibility. So, you know, it'll tell you whether certain ARIA roles are supported on certain browsers and that kind of thing. So that's a really nice technical reference. And then there's an accessibility newsletter, but a lot of times it's more around like, you know, new things on the legal side or whatever. So they link to articles with tutorials and things too. But it's funny because something else I've kind of learned about the accessibility field is that there's a lot of weight, like kind of a lot of like a gravity or something around the people who actually do conformance testing. So auditors, like people whose job it is just to make sure that things are passing WCAG guidelines. Like that's kind of, they don't dominate in a bad way, but they kind of dominate the conversation because there's a lot of people doing that work, and it's hard work, and it's like very tricky sometimes to interpret the guidelines against, you know, specific cases of UI. And so like they're probably the biggest group, and then the next biggest group is probably developers, and then like designers, and then there's, you know, people who are more on like the business, trying to make the business case and that kind of thing. So even if, you know, if you go into the web accessibility Slack, a lot of the channels are going to be dominated by these kind of like, hey, do people think this thing passes or doesn't pass this criteria? But there are channels in there that are specifically around UX and developers and tools that you can use and that kind of thing too.